You think he has it all. A house, a family, a life that looks complete. But inside that house, he feels invisible. He sits at the dinner table, present but unseen. He stands in the kitchen, silent but unnoticed. He moves through the rooms he once called his sanctuary. Now, he's become part of the furniture there but invisible. Marriage promised partnership, companionship, a place to be known, seen, valued. So why do so many married men feel this way? Why do they describe a quiet ache? Not from conflict, but from invisibility. If this feels like your story, leave a quiet comment below. I used to matter here. In the beginning, he was seen. Every little act, from fixing a dripping faucet to hanging a shelf, felt appreciated. His presence was met with warmth, sometimes a smile, sometimes a quiet thank you whispered as she passed by. His efforts weren't just noticed, they felt cherished. Even when the task was small, her acknowledgement made him feel purposeful. She admired not only what he did, but how he did it. The way he carefully folded laundry, making sure everything was neat, almost like a ritual. His quirky choice of music on slow Sunday mornings, sometimes classic rock, sometimes soft jazz, became part of their shared rhythm. Even his jokes at dinner, which weren't always funny, drew her laughter not because the punchline was perfect, but because she enjoyed him. There was a time she leaned into him when he spoke. Her eyes met his with curiosity, her body language open and inviting. Every detail about him seemed to matter then. His opinions, his thoughts, his worries, his dreams. And for him, this attention was everything. It wasn't about ego, it was about connection. His actions felt like offerings, and her gratitude felt like a kind of reward that deepened their bond. At that time, nothing he did felt transactional. There was no tallying of who did what or when. If he stayed up late to fix a leak, it was met with genuine appreciation, not expectation. If he surprised her with her favorite coffee on the way home, her delight felt pure, not perfunctory. His presence alone could brighten a room. When he walked in after a long day, her expression lifted as if the day was better simply because he had returned. That kind of welcome meant more to him than grand declarations. It gave him a sense of place, of importance, of being genuinely needed. Even his flaws were met with grace. If he forgot to pick something up, she teased him gently. If he didn't fold the towels quite right, she'd smile and fix them without resentment. In those early days, love was an atmosphere, not a ledger. It surrounded them both. There was room for patience, playfulness, forgiveness, and affection. And he mattered. His choices, his actions, and even his smallest quirks all felt significant, not because he demanded to be recognized, but because she freely chose to recognize him. In that space of mutual regard, he felt alive. This was the version of love that made every day feel like it had meaning. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about being seen in the small, quiet moments, being noticed fully not just for what he provided, but for who he was. And that feeling, that sense of being truly seen and appreciated, was the fuel that kept him showing up, giving freely, loving without hesitation, before everything changed, before the warmth cooled, before invisibility quietly crept in. But somewhere along the way, the attention faded. It didn't happen overnight. There wasn't a single moment he could point to and say, "This is when things changed." It was gradual, subtle, like a slow dimming of the light. At first, the smiles that once greeted him at the door became quick glances. Glances that, over time, turned into distracted nods. And eventually, not even that. The warmth in her eyes, once so effortless and natural, began to feel absent. Not because of anger, but because of detachment. The conversations they used to share over dinner grew shorter, shallower. At first, there were still questions. How was your day? But soon, those questions stopped coming. Instead, when he spoke, she scrolled her phone. When he tried to tell a story, she interrupted, finishing his sentences not with affectionate familiarity, but with impatience, as if waiting for him to get to the point. His presence, which once sparked curiosity, now seemed to spark mild annoyance, or worse, indifference. He noticed the way she avoided eye contact, the way she sighed without words when he entered the room, the way her body leaned away rather than toward him on the couch. It's not that there was a fight in many ways. That would have been easier. Conflict can at least feel passionate. But what he felt now was not passion, or even rejection. It was absence. He still played his roles dutifully. The man who fixed things around the house, The man who made sure the bills were paid, the yard was trimmed, the cars maintained. But increasingly, those roles felt like a job description, not a relationship. He became the provider, the chauffeur, the repairman, the helper, but rarely, almost never simply, the man who is seen. There was a time when he felt like her chosen partner, her companion, the person she looked for in the crowd, the one who made her laugh, the one she leaned on. But now, he began to feel like a fixture in the home, useful but invisible. His presence taken for granted, his contributions assumed, his emotions overlooked. Even in his own house, he started to feel like a guest, or worse, like a ghost. A man who walks through the rooms he worked so hard to provide, sits at the table he bought and maintained, stands in the kitchen he stocked, but who no longer feels noticed within those walls. And this absence, this fading of attention, is what slowly hollows him out, because it's not loud. It doesn't announce itself with a fight or a dramatic exit. It simply accumulates, until one day he wakes up and realizes, I'm still here, but no one really sees me anymore. That realization is quiet, but devastating. It's a loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being unseen, in the very place that once felt like home. Invisibility isn't always loud. It doesn't announce itself with a slammed door or a pointed accusation. It creeps in quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day it becomes the air he breathes. It shows up in the details most people wouldn't notice, but he feels deeply, the way his stories now get interrupted before he even finishes a thought. At first, it's casual. She interjects to add something or correct a minor detail, but over time, it's as if she's no longer interested in the end of his sentences, cutting him off before his words fully land. The way decisions are increasingly made without him, vacations planned, purchases made, schedules arranged, all without asking his input. His opinion, once sought out and valued, now feels like an afterthought at best, an inconvenience at worst. The way compliments that once came freely have vanished entirely. When he used to mow the lawn or fix something around the house, she would smile. You're amazing. Thank you. Now, there's silence, or worse, critique. Why didn't you do it this way? You missed a spot. Even physical affection changes. A kiss on the cheek becomes routine, a habitual motion without emotion. A hug feels obligatory, almost formal. The lingering touch that once conveyed warmth and desire has become perfunctory, brief, and mechanical. When they brush past each other in the hallway, there's no longer that casual tenderness, just two people navigating space without acknowledgement. His presence used to be met with curiosity. Now, it feels met with distraction, as if he's interrupting her scrolling or her thoughts. In day-to-day life, she speaks more about what he hasn't done than about who he is. He's measured not by his spirit, his personality, or his contributions to their shared life, but by a running checklist of tasks. Did you take the trash out? Did you fix the faucet? Did you remember the groceries? At first, he brushes it off. He tells himself they're busy, that this is just a phase, that things will return to how they were once life slows down. We're both tired. It's just the season we're in. It's normal, every couple goes through this, but slowly, the excuses wear thin. Because over time he begins to feel it deep down, that quiet ache of no longer being regarded. It's not that she doesn't speak to him. It's that when she does, her words feel transactional rather than connective. It's not that she doesn't touch him. It's that when she does, her touch feels absent of the warmth it once carried. Even the silences between them feel different now. Not comfortable or easy, but heavy. Heavy with all the things they no longer say. Heavy with the sense that his presence no longer invites attention, appreciation, or affection. The subtle erosion of regard is the most dangerous kind, because it doesn't spark dramatic fights or urgent interventions. It simply accumulates. In each unspoken compliment, each unacknowledged act of care, each moment where he feels more like a roommate than a partner. And it leaves him wondering, when did I stop being seen? How did I become invisible in my own home to the person who once saw me most clearly? That realization doesn't come with a shout or a slam. It comes quietly, like a slow leak draining joy, presence, and connection from his days. And that quiet ache? It's the signature of invisibility. And here's the hardest part. A man often won't speak these feelings out loud. He was taught explicitly or implicitly that part of being a good man means enduring quietly. To provide, to protect, to persevere, but not to complain. Not to admit that he feels unseen or insignificant, especially not in his own home. So instead of voicing the ache he feels, he withdraws. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, and internally. He stops bringing up small joys from his day because he knows they won't spark interest. He stops sharing personal frustrations because he senses they'll be minimized or dismissed. At first he tries harder to reconnect. He asks how her day was. He offers small gestures, a coffee brought home, a hand on her shoulder, an invitation to watch a movie together. But when those gestures go unnoticed or are met with disinterest, he feels something deeper. Not rejection exactly, but resignation. His attempts at closeness start to feel futile, and slowly he retreats. Not physically, he still shows up. He still does what's needed. He still fixes what's broken and pays what's due. But emotionally, he begins to edit himself. He becomes cautious with his words, not sharing what really matters to him, sticking to safe topics, avoiding vulnerability. Even his humor softens, because laughter that once felt easy now feels like it needs to be filtered in case it's met with an eye roll or silence. He tells himself this is for peace, that it's easier to stay quiet than to invite another moment of feeling brushed off, that maybe he's just expecting too much, being too sensitive, imagining things that aren't really there. But inside, this self-editing takes a toll. The silence he keeps isn't peaceful, it's protective, a shield against further disappointment, a way to keep what little dignity he feels he has left. Even when he tries to speak, perhaps in rare moments of courage, he finds that his words stumble, that he struggles to explain exactly what hurts, because what's hurting isn't one single thing, but 1,000 small absences that have accumulated over time. And so, the cycle deepens. The more he feels invisible, the less he speaks. The less he speaks, the more invisible he becomes. It's not that he doesn't care. It's that he cares so much he can't bear to see his care met with indifference. In this quiet withdrawal, he becomes less of himself. The man who once laughed easily, shared openly, and embraced life with curiosity becomes a muted version of that man, careful, cautious, distant. But what he's really doing is protecting something fragile inside. His sense of worth, his sense of dignity, his memory of once mattering. And that protection comes at a cost. Connection. Because when a man no longer feels safe enough to show up as himself, when he feels that nothing he says or does will reignite that lost regard, he shuts down, not from anger, not from bitterness, but from sorrow, from the quiet grief of realizing that in the very place he should feel most seen, he now feels most invisible. Why is this feeling of invisibility so damaging? Why does it hollow out even the strongest, most steadfast men? Because it cuts deeper than mere loneliness. It's a form of emotional abandonment, a slow erosion of worth that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unseen by the one person who once made you feel most alive. A man can handle hardship. He can endure stress at work, deal with financial pressures, navigate the chaos of modern life. But when he walks into his home, the very place that's supposed to be his refuge, and feels like a ghost, that's a wound few men know how to articulate, let alone heal. Home is supposed to be where he can drop the mask, where he can breathe, soften, and know that who he is, not just what he provides, is valued. When that disappears, when he feels like nothing more than the guy who takes out the trash, fixes the faucet, pays the bills, a quiet grief takes root inside him. And that grief doesn't announce itself dramatically. It simmers an ache that deepens day by day, year by year. He stops sharing not just because he's tired, but because invisibility teaches him that sharing doesn't matter. He begins to withdraw emotionally, not because he doesn't want connection, but because connection starts to feel one-sided, like a man calling into an empty room and hearing only echoes. This damage isn't visible from the outside. To friends and family, he may look the same. Still showing up, still attending dinners, still mowing the lawn and fixing the car and organizing the next family vacation. But inside he's carrying an invisible weight, the weight of no longer feeling significant. It's a subtle but devastating shift in identity. At one time, he may have felt like her hero, the one she looked to, admired, leaned on. But now, he feels like a background character in the story of their life together. Even moments that should feel joyful anniversaries, shared meals, quiet evenings begin to feel hollow when they lack acknowledgement. Invisibility steals meaning from everyday life. It transforms acts of care into routine obligations. It turns presence into performance, and that performance exhausts him. He still tries because that's what men like him do. They keep showing up, keep fulfilling responsibilities, keep protecting what matters. But over time, he begins to wonder, does any of this matter if I don't? That question lingers in the quiet spaces between them. It hums in the background of everyday unspoken but undeniable. Because for a man, being seen isn't just about ego or validation. It's about connection. It's about feeling that who he is, his thoughts, his feelings, his presence still matters to the person he chose to share his life with. When that disappears, when the gaze that once looked at him with warmth and admiration now looks past him, it's not just the relationship that suffers. It's the man himself who slowly fades. So why does this happen? Why does a marriage that once felt vibrant and warm become a quiet space where he feels unseen? It rarely begins with a single argument or dramatic turning point. This kind of erosion is subtle, almost invisible itself. It creeps in slowly, disguised as routine, familiarity, and fatigue. In the early years, love feels effortless. Curiosity is natural. Attention is abundant. They laugh easily, share stories freely, and savor each other's presence. But as time passes, life piles on. Bills need to be paid. Careers require attention. Children demand focus. Aging parents, social obligations, home maintenance, all of it converges. Suddenly, where there was once ease, there's now effort. Conversations become task lists. Dates get replaced by errands. Moments of quiet connection disappear under the weight of schedules and stress. And most couples don't notice this at first. They tell themselves, it's normal. We're just busy. It's just a phase. But in that rationalization, something vital begins to wither. Appreciation turns into expectation. The thank you stop, replaced by assumptions. Small gestures, the ones that once felt spontaneous and genuine, are now taken for granted or overlooked entirely. Over time, both partners drift into roles rather than relationship. She becomes busy managing the household, navigating her own stresses and struggles. He doubles down on providing, performing, fixing. In that shift, both can lose sight of each other as individuals. But for many men, this shift is particularly painful because their sense of worth is deeply tied to their role as protector, provider, and partner. When their efforts go unacknowledged, when their contributions feel invisible, they feel invisible. It's not that she intends harm. In most cases, she doesn't even realize it's happening. She's tired too, distracted, overwhelmed. But love, real connection, doesn't fade because of malice. It fades because of neglect. And neglect isn't always obvious. It shows up in the space where appreciation used to live, in the moments where presence becomes background noise, in the silence where curiosity once thrived. This slow erosion is dangerous precisely because it's quiet. No one talks about it. No one warns about it. There's no sudden rupture, no betrayal or blow-up fight, just the gradual dimming of attention, the steady replacement of warmth with routine. Until one day, a man realizes he's still in the same house, with the same woman, eating at the same table, but he feels like he's no longer part of the relationship at all. This is why invisibility hurts so much. It's not a rejection you can address head-on. It's an absence you can't easily name. And that's what makes it so hard to fix, because by the time a man notices the depth of his own invisibility, the relationship may have already slipped too far into autopilot for either partner to even realize what's been lost. It's a tragedy of small moments, of tiny omissions, of shared glances that no longer meet. A tragedy that unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, but leaves a lasting impact. If you've felt this, if you've ever sat at your own dinner table, present but invisible, if you've walked into your house and felt like a stranger, you're not alone. This isn't a call to anger. It's a call to awareness, to recognize that invisibility is one of the most painful forms of loneliness. Lonely together. And recognizing it is the first step toward healing, whether that healing means speaking up, reaching out, or quietly reclaiming your voice. If this speaks to your experience, leave a comment below. I used to matter here, because acknowledging this truth even quietly is the first act of reclaiming dignity.